On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, it turns out Spencer Knight may have quickly become a fan favorite in Chicago. We'll talk about that. Plus, Matthew Tkachuk's going to miss a little bit longer, and a key piece on defense for Utah sticking around.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, your daily podcast on the NHL. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day as well. Today's episode will feature a look at Olli Maata staying with the Utah Hockey Club. We'll get some thoughts from Locked On Utah Hockey Club as well, breaking down that news. We'll also talk about Matthew Tkachuk as the full timetable for him. Not fully released, but it's going to be a while before we see Matthew Tkachuk again. And we'll talk about Spencer Knight, who was traded from Florida in the Seth Jones trade and immediately embraced by Chicago fans. We'll talk about how that all went down as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, joined by Rachel Donner today of Locked On Flyers. And Rachel, it is we're getting closer to trade season, so we're going to see trades happen. We're going to see plenty of trade speculation happen. And we're starting with one piece here today that is not going to be moved as part of the Utah Hockey Club. They are trying to get their decor locked in after kind of piecing that together in the offseason. And Olli Maata staying with the Utah Hockey Club after signing a new 3-year extension. It'll be $3.5 million per year. And it does include a 10-team modified no-trade list in next year, 2025-2026, and a 5-team no-trade list in 2026-2027. But before we break down that signing, let's hear from Locked On Utah Hockey Club as they give us a little bit into why this was a priority for the Utah Hockey Club.
All right, we got some breaking news for you here, Utah Hockey Clubbers. Olli Maata has been extended for 3 years at an average annual value of $3.5 million. So that's a big contract signing for the Utah Hockey Club. GM Bill Armstrong just praised his mental side of the game, talking about his veteran presence. I think he has been a tremendous add for the Utah Hockey Club this year. And now after this year, this will kick in next year, 3 years of $3.5 million. That's a nice contract. Still some plenty of tread on the tires when it comes to Olli Maata, so I think that this is a good one. He's won a couple of Stanley Cups, providing veteran leadership. He's just a steady presence back there on the blue line, and honestly, I don't think you can have too much of that if you're going to be successful in the playoffs. So we're going to cover it on our next Locked On Utah Hockey Club podcast. Robin and I will have in-depth thoughts about the move, but wanted to get this out there. Breaking news, Olli Maata, 3 years extension with the Utah Hockey Club.
And Rachel, as we look at this move, for me, it seems like a pretty solid deal for a guy who has been playing some top 4 minutes for Utah pretty much all season, and just one piece of this rebuilt decor that seems to be a solid fit. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so, and I think he's right. It is a smart move to shore that up, and I think like with a team like Utah that's trying to just establish themselves, they are borderline playoff contenders right now, but looking to build for the future. I think he's a great kind of bridge top 4 defenseman to have with the club to kind of support it as they're bringing in more and more of their top prospects that they've been able to build up over the last several years through, the old Arizona organization and their newer draft picks last year and this upcoming year.
Now, as far as the rest of this group goes, obviously Ian Cole is an unrestricted free agent. They've got some other questions, but all of a sudden now you've got 6 different defensemen on the roster, and I have to kind of remind myself that Utah put this together literally at the draft last season.
They did.
They didn't really know what they were going to do on D. They had, I think, like one defenseman under contract before the draft, and they were able to piece this all together. Not bad work, because I know there have been some things that have led to inconsistencies from Utah in terms of performance this year, but it's been a solid group, at least on D, that has kept them in plenty of games.
Yeah, I think so. And, and this is a team that, again, because there were so many disparate pieces that put it together, the fact that they had a really strong early start to the season, I think has been helpful to them as they've kind of struggled to find the right combinations and the right chemistry over the course of the season. That's led to the ups and downs. But the fact that they're still in the hunt here, even if they don't make it, I think you call this season a success for them.
Oh, yeah, I would certainly agree. Now, there are plenty of other defensemen who are making the rounds, as they typically do at this point, because it seems like every team is like, if we could get one more defenseman, that would really help us out. So let's just go through some of the recent rumblings. I know you jotted down a few, and we'll talk them out as we get closer to the trade deadline, which is Friday.
Yeah, I think, the weirdest one to me, and I understand why he's there, but the weirdest one to me is Erik Karlsson, because I think that while he isn't as good as he once was, that is clear. He's still a very, very good defenseman. And I saw him play twice in the last week because of a home and home between the Flyers and Pens, and he's got it. Like, that's for sure. However, his defense isn't as consistent, and he's got 2 more years left on his deal, and the Pens hit for him is $10 million a season. So plus he has a full no trade. So I'm sure he would waive to go to a contender. I don't think that's an issue, but the fact that like the Pens would have to probably retain, I would say 4 would probably be about what they'd have to do here, right?
Yeah, and Pittsburgh's got to be careful too, because they are continuing to, and look, I don't fault them for doing this because it's Sidney Crosby, but you're continuing to try to kind of prop the team up through the final few years of his career, and there are going to be plenty of opportunities for them to jettison players that are going to likely need retention in order to do so. And so you got to be really careful and thought out about how this process is going to play out, because you only get a couple slots to do it. So they got to be really careful. And, I would say Karlsson definitely has, like you mentioned, he's still got the offensive game for sure. So maybe a team is willing to give you a pretty penny for his services, but it's also a large contract. So that'll be an interesting one to see if that plays out. It may not happen at this deadline, but those talks may resume once we get to the off season.
Yeah, I think so. Now, if you're looking for more of a two-way defenseman that's got more solid defensive skills, I think Ivan Provorov is a really interesting option. Now, with Columbus in the hunt and very much in playoff contention right now, but not likely to make a strong cup run this year, Provorov's on an expiring contract. I think it's a little over 6 if memory serves. And I think he would be a very interesting late addition for a cup contending team, just because I think that he does bring a two-way game to the table, and you can be really flexible with how you use him in the lineup.
Yeah, and that might be a situation too where Columbus, while maybe not as likely to make that type of move with them being in contention, but maybe that frees up a little money for them to go get somebody else. I mean, you've got somebody who is emerging as one of like the premier defensemen in the league in Zach Werenski. So, maybe this allows you the opportunity to make a big swing, because nobody expected that Columbus was going to be in this position this year with everything they went through in the off season. And it feels like if they can do, take a little bit of a swing to further this and to put themselves in the playoffs, I think that would lead to a lot of people rooting for them when we get to that point.
Yeah, I think so. Of course, from my perspective, the other guy on the list is Rasmus Ristolainen. He is perennially on these lists. He's also got an extra year, though, left on his contract. It's at 5.1. And I don't know that the Flyers want to retain on him. So I think it's somewhat likely they could trade him, but not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. And I think Danny Briere's price is going to probably be pretty high on him too, because everybody loves him on the team.
Yeah, I think you're right on too. Unless a team like Anaheim, who, let's be honest, they don't mind taking on any length of contract. Unless you have a team like that that's looking to just kind of shake things up, that retention gets tricky. So it will be interesting to see if any of these names, do get moved. I would imagine that deadline day is going to be, there's going to be a lot of buildup to it, as we typically see, and what we get for deals. I think a lot of what we saw already happened before the Four Nations face-off, but I guess we'll wait and see. One of those teams that could potentially make a big splash now that they know a little more concrete timeline on one of their superstars is the Florida Panthers, who announced that unfortunately we're not going to be seeing Matthew Tkachuk anytime soon. We'll talk about his timetable as well as what this means for the Florida Panthers as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this.
Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety because I'm kind of lazy and I don't want to unshell them. But it's the perfect snack to have at my desk while I'm working. And recently I had some friends over for a movie night, and instead of popcorn, I passed around bowls of a different variety of their flavors. Everybody loved all of them, but I would say the Wonderful Pistachios chili roasted no shells and the sea salt and vinegar no shells were the biggest hits by far. So delicious and healthy too. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. These little green wonders pack a protein punch. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more.
Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL part of your listening plans throughout the week. Seth, Toupal, and Rachel Donner hanging out with you here on a Tuesday. And Rachel, we got the definitive word. I think a lot of people expected it was coming.
Yeah.
But we did get the official Matthew Tkachuk will miss the remainder of the regular season from the Florida Panthers. And it is going to be very interesting to see what they do. What now that we know that cap hit is there to be utilized. Do they make a big swing? Do they make a big deal at the deadline to try to fill that void, at least for the regular season?
Yeah, I think so. But I want to rewind a little bit because I am retroactively even more angry on behalf of Kyle Connor right now, who did not get to play in that last game for Team USA and Four Nations in lieu of a clearly injured Matthew Tkachuk.
Yeah.
And, I don't care if it changes the outcome of the game or not. Like, I honestly did not care who won that game, but I was there in person covering it, and I literally talked to Kyle Connor, and you could see the determination and the drive that he had, and he wanted to be in that game more than anything. And the fact that they sat him in lieu of Matthew Tkachuk will never stop making me angry. And now we know why, right? He's definitely hurt. and out for the rest of the regular season. And, it's not fair to the Florida Panthers either. Let's be, clear about that. But I do think that, I will be a Kyle Connor fan for the rest of eternity because of this, for sure.
Well, and it's, that was the interesting thing too with that whole decision is like you have, and it's not like Kyle Connor is he's got over 30 goals. He's been one of the top goal scorers in the NHL over the last few seasons. It's like he's just sitting there.
Just sitting there on the bench doing nothing. Whatever.
And you've got enough sort of bite or whatever with Brady Tkachuk that I think you could have afforded a little more goal scoring. But that's just me. I mean, I guess we'll know with the Olympics. I guess is the next time we'll get to see the team put together. But for the Panthers, I made this analogy a few weeks ago when it was initially announced that he was going to be out for a bit. It's a Panthers team that still has a ton of depth on the roster, so it's not like you're missing your one superstar, but it does take away a little bit of kind of that talent depth from their roster. I equated this to the Colorado Avalanche without Gabe Landeskog. Like, obviously, you still have a lot of you've got McKinnon, you've got Rantanen at the top of that lineup, but it just brings them to a different gear having Tkachuk in the lineup. And so I don't think Florida has to worry about missing the postseason or anything, but it is not as deep of a Panthers team that they would be with him in the lineup. So it's something I would imagine they'll try to address here before Friday.
Right. And, it's a certain type of role that you're looking at with Matthew Tkachuk, where, he is, again, like, no shade, he's a very talented hockey player and has the dual purpose of being very effective, but also that physical guy, that chirper guy. And to be missing that, I mean, there's other guys on this team that can step up and do those things, but nobody does it like Matthew Tkachuk either. So I think it's just a kind of presence out there on the ice that you miss that other teams could take advantage of. But you're also correct. This team is making the playoffs. Like, it's not a question there. So
yeah,
it just remains to be seen what the long-term effects are. And if he does return, let's say the first round of the playoffs, then you have a team that's kind of ramped up to go into the playoffs without him, and then they have to reinsert him, and that kind of upsets the apple cart a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's something that is definitely a factor, is just the chemistry that gets built up over these next few weeks. The other interesting part about this too is just looking at what Florida has at their disposal. They just traded their 2026 first round pick to acquire Seth Jones. So that's off the table. They do have their 2027 first round pick, but their earliest pick in this upcoming draft is the 4th round. So this is the other side.
They were all in last year.
Yeah, this is the other side of the coin, is that when you hit the top of the mountain is and I heard this analogy, I forget, I should have written it down. I didn't, but I saw it on X that somebody said, when your window is open, you need to pour as many assets as you can into that specific window. Any picks, any prospects that aren't like obvious franchise, like cornerstone type prospects, anything that doesn't help you right now should be utilized in order to help you right now. And I've always kind of had that in my head as that's a way that I think a lot of teams kind of miss the mark. But we're seeing this Florida Panthers team, like, they're pouring everything they have into this window to contend. And now
this is not a sustainable team here for the long haul. It's just not. And it's pretty remarkable to see, given how this team was received in South Florida until like 2 years ago. right?
Yeah.
Like, do they want to go back to that? And it's very possible that they could. I mean, you look at Aaron Ekblad being on an expiring contract and what's that going to take to keep him around. Like, it's a really interesting time for the Panthers.
Yeah, you've got Sam Bennett, who's coming up on the end of his deal. You also have Mackie Samoskevich, who I would imagine the Panthers are hoping can be a big piece for them, but you got to pay him next year. So it's
Cap's going up, but
that's only going to help them out so much. So it's going to be, Florida is one team I'm keeping an eye on, because if there's a GM that can find a way to get it done, it's Bill Zito. But also
true.
there's not a lot in that cupboard. But speaking of, one of the players that was in the Panthers system was Spencer Knight. He no longer is. He has been sent to Chicago in that Seth Jones trade. And we're going to talk to finish the show about his debut in Chicago. Really interesting to see how that whole thing played out. So we'll break down Spencer Knight in Chicago and if he maybe has found a home to stay. We'll talk about that as we finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day. Seth, Toupal, and Rachel Donner hanging out here on a Tuesday edition of the show. And Rachel, to finish things off here today, as part of that trade for Seth Jones, Spencer Knight was sent to Chicago. And he played in his debut, because obviously it's not a secret that Chicago has not figured out the goalie position quite yet. So they're kind of plugging and playing and trying to find somebody to fill that role going long term. And Knight was pretty darn good in his debut. He allowed, I think, just one goal and got a huge ovation from the fans, and actually had a lengthy interview after the game talking about the reception and how much he enjoyed, just feeling part of our group and kind of being welcomed in. So before we break that down a little bit, let's hear from Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks about that game, and I'm sure a little bit about that reception as well.
Blackhawks win a second straight game for just the third time this season, and first since mid-December, defeating the Los Angeles Kings 5-1 at the United Center. Main takeaway of the night undoubtedly was Spencer Knight, who stopped 41 of the 42 shots that he faced in his team debut. He was absolutely phenomenal, particularly in the opening 20 minutes when the Kings came with a strong surge, but he got some strong run support in the final 40 minutes. Ryan Donato and Teuvo Teravainen continue to lead the charge offensively. Ilya Mikheyev with 2 points as well. All around, great team win for the Blackhawks. They'll look to keep it going on Wednesday against the Senators. But for more thoughts on this win, check out tomorrow's episode of Locked On Blackhawks.
Thank you, Jack. And yeah, it's weird to think about a goalie like Spencer Knight, who he's been around for a little bit, but it seems like he's been through a lot more than regular run-of-the-mill NHL players have to go through. And he basically is set up to be the heir apparent to Sergei Bobrovsky. And then all of a sudden that's out the window. And now he's working on getting a new start in a new city with a new team. And, we think often about like the transactional side of the NHL. At the end of the day, these guys are players too. Like, they're human beings. And as much as you may want to see a team make a trade for a particular player, there's a lot that goes into it. And there's uprooting from your community and having to try to restart. It's a lot. It's a very big process, no matter who it is that gets traded.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we know, he was very public about his struggle with OCD and coming back from that to be able to manage it and to play. And, he went through all of that with the Panthers organization, who prior to that, it felt like he was kind of being jerked around, whether, he was going to play, he wasn't going to play, send him down, bring him back up. Like, there was just so much turmoil with his time in Florida that, while it's very risky for Florida to have made this deal, given that Bobrovsky only has one more year on his deal, and then there's going to be question marks in net for him there, I do think Chicago is a really good landing spot for him. Now, having to face 42 shots on goal in your debut is not ideal. And when you lose a defenseman like Seth Jones, maybe that's going to happen, right? On the Chicago side of things. But the fact that he was able to handle it and, come out with a win in his first game is really important. And as the Blackhawks are trying to build a team and they have a really strong prospect base coming up, I think that he's the perfect kind of goaltender to kind of grow with this team. And will it work out in the end for him? Who knows? But I think he's a really good stabilizing force for Chicago as they try and put all the other pieces together.
Yeah, and we've seen this quite a bit, especially recently. Like, the example I think of is Yaroslav Askarov in Nashville, where you're stuck behind like a franchise icon, and you're like, boy, when is it going to be my time to get an opportunity here? And, to Askarov's case, he was very vocal about thinking that he deserved a chance, and Barry Trotz said what he said about that. Spencer Knight, maybe not as vocal in that instance, but it's the same kind of thing where these young goalies, like, all they need is a team to, I think, just give them a chance. Like, say, hey, it's your net. As you look at what Chicago has right now with Peter Mrazek, Laurent Brossoit has been injured most of the year, and Arvid Soderblom, like, there's a very legitimate chance, and it's probably a likely chance at this point, that Spencer Knight can beat out all of those goalies and kind of take the lead in this chase where it would be his net and he wouldn't have anybody that he was having to sit behind and wait.
Right.
It's just, it is the whole process of being a goalie in the NHL. I think that fans get frustrated with, is expecting, well, this 21-year-old kid is supposed to be the franchise staple. Why isn't he here? Why doesn't he just step in between the pipes and just take all the starts right off the bat? There's the development piece, and there is, the mental side of it, which is way bigger for goalies than it is for other players in the league. And it leads to a lot of these situations, and it leads to a lot of like slow starts for goalies, just because it takes them a lot longer to develop and to get to the point where they're ready for it.
Yeah, and I don't think Peter Mrazek is a bad option as a backup to a Spencer Knight right now, at least for another year. I think, given that he's under contract, and I don't think trading him is going to be possible for the Blackhawks, I think that's kind of the situation they're in for the remainder of this year and next year. But I think that puts them in a really good position, because Spencer Knight will be an RFA when his contract expires. So they'll be in the driver's seat. They'll figure out if it's the right fit for this growing and building team, and then get the right veteran backup to support him at that point. And I just think the timing works out really well for the Blackhawks.
Yeah, this just seems like a really, really good acquisition for Chicago. And anytime you can have the performance that he did in his debut and get a lot of cheers from the fans, and for him to show that gratitude too, that was a great, great piece of this whole thing, which leads me to wishing Spencer Knight well with his new team in Chicago. Hopefully he is able to kind of take the reins there and turn that into his net and just turn it into a nice little career.
Yeah, I
well,
think so.
That I think is going to wrap it up for today's episode. Rachel, thank you for joining me here for today's Tuesday edition. For listeners, make sure that you check out all of the other episodes throughout the week of Locked On NHL, including Rachel's normal Friday slot. in the Locked On NHL show. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday, so make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We bring them to you every single day as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.